A waitress dropped her locket, unleashing a past a Mafia boss thought was dead. Now a simple girl holds the key to his empire and his heart. But in this world of loyalty and betrayal, love is the most dangerous weapon of all. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The silver locket slipped from Lena's fingers as if it were greased, clattering onto the polished marble floor of the VIP lounge. It skidded, a tiny, treacherous disc of metal, coming to a perfect stop against the immaculate shine of a pair of black Oxfords. "I'm so sorry, sir," she gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She dropped to her knees, her waitress uniform suddenly feeling like a cheap costume, her fingers scrambling for the chain. A large, impeccably manicured hand got there first. Donato Rossi plucked the locket from the floor, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the small, oval object resting in his palm. The hum of quiet conversation in the lounge had died, replaced by a silence so profound Lena could hear the blood roaring in her ears. "Where?" His voice was low, a controlled rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. "Did you get this?" Lena dared to look up. His face, usually an unreadable mask of cool authority, was pale. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His knuckles were white where he gripped the locket. It's mine, sir. It was my father's," she stammered. His dark eyes, sharp enough to flay a man's soul bare, finally lifted to meet hers. They were filled with a storm of something she couldn't name, shock, disbelief, a raw, painful hope. "Your father," he repeated, the words tasting foreign. He clicked the locket open. The photograph inside, faded and sepia-toned, showed a young man with a laughing, carefree expression, his features a ghostly echo of the man now holding it. Donato's breath hitched, a barely audible sound in the tense silence. He looked from the picture to Lena, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the shape of her eyes. "This man is your father?" "Yes," Lena whispered, confusion twisting into a knot of fear in her stomach. Donato closed the locket with a definitive snap. The sound was like a gunshot. He stood, his height and presence suddenly overwhelming. He pocketed the locket. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a request, it was a decree. Before Lena could protest, two of his men, silent as shadows, flanked her, their grips firm on her elbows, lifting her to her feet. "Wait, you can't." "That," Donato said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper meant only for her as he led the way out, his men guiding her firmly behind him, "is the face of my brother, Antonio Rossi, the man who was stolen from his family 20 years ago. And if he is your father, then you, little waitress, are the key to finding the rightful heir to this empire." The car was a silent, black beast. They didn't blindfold her. Donato seemed to operate on the unshakable belief that she was no threat, and that what she was seeing now, the discreet, armoured car, the armed men, the transition from the glittering city into a heavily guarded estate shrouded in ancient oaks, was already hers by birthright. She was shoved not into a cell, but into a suite of rooms so opulent it made her head spin. Silk drapes, a four-poster bed, a bathroom with gold fixtures. It was a gilded cage. Hours later, the door opened. Donato entered alone, having shed his suit jacket. He moved to the minibar, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal tumbler, and downed it in one go. He finally turned to her, his gaze intense. "Tell me everything," he commanded. "Your father, his name, his life." Lena, who had been huddled in a plush armchair, wrapped her arms around herself. "His name is David Miller. He's a gardener. He's kind and quiet, and he raised me alone. He gave me that locket on my 18th birthday, said it was all he had left of his life before me." "David Miller," Donato scoffed, the name sounding like an insult. "My brother's name is Antonio Rossi. He was 16 when they took him. A rival family, we thought. We burned half the city to the ground looking for him. We found nothing. For 20 years, nothing." He paced, a caged panther. "And now, you, a waitress in my club, wearing his face around her neck. My father is a good man, Lena insisted, a spark of defiance igniting. He's not some mafia prince. Donato stopped his pacing and looked at her, a strange, almost pitying expression on his face. The man you know as David Miller has been living a lie, hiding. My brother was born to lead. He was fierce, brilliant, a Rossi to his core. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space. You have his eyes. Lena looked away, her mind reeling. Her gentle, soft-spoken father, who loved his rose bushes and old books. A Mafia heir. It was impossible. A nightmare. Days blurred into a week. Lena remained a prisoner in her luxurious suite. Donato visited daily, a relentless interrogator. He showed her old photographs, a sprawling Italian villa, a serious-looking boy with Donato's same intense eyes, a family portrait with a stern-faced man, and a beautiful, sad-eyed woman. Your grandparents, Donato said, tapping the photo. They died of broken hearts, they said. But I know it was the shame of losing their firstborn, the weakness it showed. He was trying to break her image of her father, to replace it with his own. But with each story, each faded picture, Lena didn't see a monster. She saw a scared boy, trapped in a life of violence who had found a way out. She saw the reason for the faint sadness that always lingered in David's eyes, the reason he'd never spoken of his past. One evening, Donato came to her, his expression grim. We're leaving. Tonight. Why? Where? There are factions. Men in my organization who have grown comfortable with my leadership. The idea of Antonio's return of a new heir is a threat to their power. Marco, my underboss, has made his displeasure known. It's not safe for you here anymore. The journey was a tense, nocturnal affair. They moved in a convoy of black SUVs, cutting through the darkness to a remote, fortified safe house on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was here, isolated from the world, that the dynamic between them began to shift. Donato was no longer just her captor. He was her protector. He taught her how to hold a gun, his hands firm and steady over hers, his breath warm against her ear. A Rossi must know how to defend what is theirs, he'd murmur, and she'd feel a shiver that had nothing to do with fear. He told her stories of his childhood with Antonio, secret adventures, shared secrets, a bond forged in the unique fire of their family's legacy. The raw pain in his voice when he spoke of the day his brother disappeared was real. Lena began to see the man beneath the Mafia boss, a man burdened by duty, hardened by loss, and fiercely loyal to the ghost of a brother he refused to forget. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows of the safe house, they sat before a roaring fire. Donato had been drinking, the whiskey loosening the tight control he usually kept on his emotions. For 20 years, I have held this empire together with blood and will, he said, his voice rough. I never wanted it. It was always meant to be his. I have done terrible things, Lena, things that would make your gentle father weep. All to keep his seat warm for him. Lena looked at him, at the firelight dancing in the dark depths of his eyes, at the weary slope of his shoulders. The fear she had felt was slowly being replaced by a dangerous, compelling empathy. Maybe he didn't want the seat, she said softly. Donato's eyes snapped to hers. It doesn't matter what he wanted. It's his birthright. It's who he is. And you? He stood, looming over her. You are his blood. You carry the legacy in your veins, whether you like it or not. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. The touch was electric, a shocking contrast to his usual severity. Lena's breath caught. The air crackled thick with unsaid things. When I look at you, he whispered, his voice a low thrum, I see him, but I also see you. The woman who isn't afraid to look me in the eye, the woman who defends a ghost with more ferocity than my most seasoned soldiers. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. It was a claiming, a question, and a confession all in one. Lena should have pulled away. She should have been terrified. But in that moment, trapped between the ghost of her father and the living, breathing reality of the man who held her captive, all she felt was a terrifying, inevitable pull. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Dio, what are you doing to me?" And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a storm of possession, desperation, and 20 years of lonely, bitter grief. It was the kiss of a man who had built his life on a foundation of control, finally losing it. Lena, swept away by the torrent of her own confused emotions, fear, sympathy, a strange, twisted loyalty, kissed him back. It was in the hazy, intimate aftermath, tangled in the sheets of his bed, the storm still raging outside, that the fragile new world they had built shattered. Donato's phone, which had been silent for days, buzzed insistently on the nightstand. He answered it, his voice still husky with sleep and satisfaction. Lena watched his face in the dim light. She saw the relaxation drain from his body, replaced by a rigid, cold tension. His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer the eyes of her lover. They were the eyes of the Mafia boss. He ended the call and got out of bed, pulling on his clothes with swift, efficient movements. "What is it?" Lena asked, sitting up, the silk sheet pulled to her chest. A cold dread seeping into her bones. He turned to her, his expression a mask of icy fury. "Marco, he found us, but that's not all." He paused, his gaze pinning her to the bed. "He didn't just track my phone. He had a source, someone on the inside, feeding him information." Lena's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Donato said, his voice dangerously soft, "that your father, the gentle gardener, David Miller, didn't just run away. He made a deal. He traded his name, his birthright for a new life, and in return he became Marco's man, a sleeper agent, planted in the world, waiting. Marco knew where Antonio was all along. He's been using him as a trump card, waiting for the right moment to play him against me." He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. The look he gave her was one of pure, unadulterated betrayal. "And you, Lena? Were you the play? Was dropping that locket Marco's move, or yours?" He left, slamming the door behind him, leaving Lena alone in the lavish room, the ghost of his touch on her skin and the devastating weight of his accusation crushing her heart. Her father, working with the man who now wanted her dead. Was her entire life, her entire identity just a lie within a lie? And Donato? Did he ever truly see her? Or was she just a piece on his chessboard, a link to his brother, now tainted by the ultimate betrayal? The gilded cage was now a prison of doubt and heartbreak, and outside the storm of violence was about to break. The slam of the door echoed in the vast, opulent room, a sound more final than any lock. Lena sat frozen, the silk sheets now feeling like a shroud. Donato's words, "Were you the play?" replayed in her mind, each time laced with a fresh, cutting horror. Her father, her kind, gentle David. A traitor? A pawn for a man like Marco? It was unthinkable. Yet, the cold, brutal logic of this world was a poison, seeping into the foundations of everything she knew. Had her entire life been a carefully constructed lie? The locket, her most treasured possession. Was it just a prop? She scrambled out of bed, her body aching with a new kind of vulnerability. Wrapping a robe around herself, she paced the cold marble floor. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in her soul. One moment she was burning with indignation. How could he believe that of her? After the intimacy they had shared, after she had seen the vulnerability in his eyes. The next moment, a chilling doubt crept in. What did she really know of Donato Rossi? He was a man who ruled through fear and violence. Last night could have been just another strategy, a way to disarm her, to make her pliable. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't Donato's forceful rap. "Signorina Lena?" a quiet, older voice called. It was Alfredo, the ancient, stoic butler who ran the safe house. "I have brought you breakfast." "I'm not hungry," she called back, her voice trembling. There was a pause. The boss. He has left the premises. He has ordered that you are to be kept safe. But it is for your own good that you eat, Signorina. You will need your strength. Left. The word struck her like a physical blow. He had left her here. After accusing her of the ultimate betrayal, he had just left. Was he going after Marco? Or was he going after David? The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Alfredo, is he going to hurt my father? The door unlocked and opened a crack. Alfredo stood there, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes holding a deep, weary sorrow. He carried a silver tray which he set down on a table. The boss does what he must to protect what is his, he said evasively. And what am I? Lena whispered, the question tearing from her throat. What am I to him now? Alfredo's gaze softened. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if seeing past the waitress, past the pawn, to the terrified young woman within. You are a Rossi, he said simply. That has not changed. And the boss. He is a man who has trusted no one for a very long time. Trust is a luxury we cannot afford. But it is also a hunger, and a man who is starving will often recoil from a feast, fearing it is a trick. His words were a cryptic comfort. He turned to leave, but Lena stopped him. Alfredo, wait, please. You've been with the family a long time. You knew Antonio. The old man's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. I did. What was he really like? Alfredo was silent for a long moment, his eyes looking into a distant past. He was sunlight, he said finally, his voice thick with memory. Where Donato was the storm, Antonio was the sun. Charming, quick to laugh, with a fire in him that could inspire men to follow him anywhere. But that same fire, it scared your grandfather. He thought Donato's cold calculation was a better shield for this life. He was harder on Antonio. I believe that is why he was so easily led astray. Led astray? By Marco? Alfredo nodded slowly, as if betraying a great secret. Marco was new then, ambitious. He saw a prince who felt unloved by his king and saw an opportunity. He filled Antonio's head with ideas of his own power, his own destiny away from his father's shadow. The night he disappeared, there was a fight, a terrible one. With your grandfather. Antonio left. We all thought he would cool off and return, but he never did. And Marco was the last one to see him. He looked at Lena, his eyes full of pity. The boss has spent 20 years believing his brother was stolen by enemies. To discover he was lured away by a viper he himself nurtured in his bosom. It is a wound that may never heal. The pieces were crashing together in Lena's mind, forming a picture more tragic and complex than she could have imagined. Her father wasn't just a victim. He was a runaway. A disillusioned prince seduced by a traitor. And Donato's rage wasn't just about the empire. It was about the betrayal of a brother he adored. A betrayal that had been facilitated by his own, most trusted man. He thinks I'm part of it, Lena said, her voice hollow. He thinks my whole life has been a setup by Marco. It is the only world he knows, Signorina, Alfredo said gently. A world of traps and deceptions. To believe otherwise, to believe in a simple waitress and a coincidence of fate, that would require a faith he lost the night his brother vanished. After Alfredo left, Lena picked at the food, her appetite gone. The hours dragged by, each one stretching into an eternity of anxiety. She listened for the sound of engines, for his return. But the only sound was the relentless rain. As dusk began to fall, painting the stormy sky in shades of bruised purple and grey, she heard it, the distant roar of engines growing louder, not one, but many. Her heart leapt into her throat. He was back. She ran to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The convoy of SUVs skidded to a halt in the courtyard below. Men poured out, their postures tense. Donato emerged from the lead vehicle, his black coat soaked, his face a mask of grim fury. And then she saw him. Being pulled roughly from the second SUV was David. Her father. He looked older, smaller, his clothes muddy and disheveled, his face pale with fear and confusion. But it was him. Alive. A sob caught in Lena's throat. Without a second thought, she turned and ran from the room, flying down the grand staircase and throwing open the heavy front door. "Papa!" David's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and relief. "Lena! Thank God you're safe!" Donato stood between them, a dark, immovable object. He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Lena's. The look in them was chilling. It was no longer the heat of betrayal, but the cold, flat calm of a verdict already passed. "Get her inside," he ordered one of his men, not taking his eyes off David. "No!" Lena cried, struggling as a guard gently but firmly took her arm. "Donato, please, let me talk to him." "You've done enough talking," Donato said, his voice low and deadly. He turned his attention back to David. "Hello, brother. It's been a long time." David Miller, Antonio Rossi, swallowed hard, straightening his shoulders with a dignity that seemed at odds with his situation. "Donato, you look, well." A humorless, sharp smile cut across Donato's face. "I have had to be. While you were playing in the dirt, I was holding our empire together. But you weren't just playing, were you? You were conspiring. With Marco." David's eyes flickered to Lena, a pained expression on his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me!" Donato roared, the sound echoing in the courtyard, making everyone flinch. He closed the distance between them in 2 swift strides, grabbing the front of David's shirt. "Marco told me everything. How you reached out to him. How he helped you disappear in exchange for your loyalty. You were his insurance policy, a claim to the throne he could play if I ever became a problem." "No, it wasn't like that," David insisted, his voice shaking. "I was a boy, Donato. A stupid, angry boy. Marco found me after I ran away. He offered me a way out. He said he was protecting me from father." "And you believed him," Donato snarled, shaking him. "You chose that snake over your own blood." "I was scared, and you were always the strong one, the perfect son. I couldn't live up to that." Tears were streaming down David's face now, mingling with the rain. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to be free. When I met Lena's mother, it was my chance. I took it. I left it all behind. For her. For my daughter." His eyes found Lena's again, pleading, full of a love that was undeniably real. "I never spoke to Marco again after that day. I swear it on Lena's life. He found me a new identity, and I vanished. I thought he had forgotten about me." Donato stared at him, his chest heaving, his knuckles white where he gripped David's shirt. The rage was still there, a living thing. But Lena could see the cracks in his armor. She could see the 16-year-old boy who had lost his big brother, the boy who was still desperately trying to understand why he was left behind. "He didn't forget you, Antonio," Donato said, his voice dropping to a tortured whisper. "He was just waiting. And you? You gave him the key to destroy everything. Your daughter walked into my club, and you handed Marco his weapon." "I didn't know," David cried. "The locket. It was all I had of my mother. I gave it to Lena so she would have a piece of where she came from. I never dreamed. I never thought you would still be looking for me." The scene was a heartbreaking tableau. The 2 brothers, reunited after 2 decades by a storm of betrayal and violence, with Lena caught in the middle, the living proof of a life built on the ashes of another. Donato finally released David, shoving him back a step. He looked from his brother's broken, sincere face to Lena's terrified one. The evidence of Marco's treachery was irrefutable, but the story David was telling, it had the ring of truth. The truth of a coward, perhaps, but not a conspirator. "Lock him in the West Wing room," Donato commanded, his voice drained of all emotion. "Guard the door." As David was led away, casting one last agonized look at his daughter, Donato turned and walked towards the house, towards Lena. The guard holding her arm released her and discreetly moved away. They stood in the grand foyer, water dripping from Donato's coat onto the marble floor. The space between them felt like a chasm. "He's telling the truth," Lena said, her voice barely a whisper. Donato's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. His weakness, his naivety, has put a target on your back that is a mile wide. Marco knows you are the key. As long as you and your father live, you are a threat to his claim. He will not stop until you are both dead. He finally looked at her, and the raw conflict in his eyes stole her breath. The boss, warring with the man who had held her last night, warring with the man who saw her as a political liability. "So what happens now?" Lena asked, her heart pounding. "Are we your prisoners, or are we your family?" Donato took a step closer, his gaze intense, searching her face as if the answer was written there. "Marco has made his move. He has declared war. There is a meeting tomorrow night. All the capos will be there. He will make his play for leadership, using the return of Antonio as proof of my failure, my sentimentality." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, a shocking contrast to the violence of moments before. "He does not understand. Sentimentality is not my weakness. It is my strength." His thumb brushed over her lips, his eyes dark with possession and a terrifying, absolute resolve. "You asked me what you are to me," he murmured, his voice a low, visceral thrum that resonated in her very bones. "You are mine. Your father is mine. This empire is mine. Marco thinks he can take what is mine. He is about to learn the price of that mistake." He leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from hers. The air crackled with the promise of violence and a desperate, clinging passion. "Tomorrow night, you and your father will stand by my side. You will wear the Rossi name not as a burden, but as a crown. And we will show them all what it means to be family." The silence in the foyer was heavier than any sound. Donato's declaration hung in the air, a vow etched in steel and blood. Lena could only stare, her mind reeling from the whiplash of the last few minutes, the violent reunion, her father's desperate pleas, and now this claiming. "You are mine." He didn't wait for her answer. His thumb stroked her cheek once more, a gesture of terrifying tenderness, before he turned and strode away, his wet coat leaving dark footprints on the pale marble. He was already barking orders into his phone, the Mafia boss fully re-engaged, the brief glimpse of the man vanishing behind the impenetrable mask. Alfredo appeared, his expression unreadable. "Signorina, come. You should change. You are shivering." She was. A deep, bone-level tremble that had little to do with the cold. She allowed herself to be led upstairs to a different room, one even more lavish than the last. A black dress, simple, elegant, and undoubtedly expensive, was laid out on the bed. It was her armor for the battle to come. Alone, she changed. The silk of the dress felt foreign against her skin, a costume for a role she never auditioned for. She looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The waitress was gone. In her place was a woman with haunted eyes and the posture of a queen in a story she didn't write. Her thoughts were a chaotic storm. Her father, locked in a room just down the hall. The gentle gardener, Antonio Rossi. The weight of that name felt like a physical burden. And Donato. His kiss still burned on her lips, his words echoed in her soul. "You are mine." It wasn't a question. It was a fact he had decreed. And the most terrifying part was the part of her that, despite everything, responded to that raw, primal certainty. A soft knock. "Lena? It's me." Her father's voice. She rushed to the door, finding it unlocked. David stood there, cleaned up and wearing fresh clothes, but he looked decades older, the fear in his eyes a permanent fixture now. "Papa," she breathed, pulling him into the room and hugging him tightly. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" No. They were efficient," he said, his voice weary. He held her at arm's length, his eyes scanning her face, the expensive dress. "Lena, What is happening? What has he told you? He says we have to stand with him tomorrow, at a meeting, against Marco. David's face crumpled. No. God, no. Lena, you can't. This world, it's a cancer. It destroys everything it touches. I ran from it to save myself, to save any family I might have. I will not let it consume you. It's a little late for that, don't you think? Lena said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. You gave me the locket, Papa. You set this in motion. I gave you a memory of my mother, he insisted, his eyes pleading. A piece of beauty from a life of ugliness. I never dreamed he was still looking. I thought I was a ghost to them. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. Donato, he was just a boy when I left. A serious, fierce boy who loved his big brother too much. I failed him. I see that now. But that doesn't mean you have to pay for my sins. Lena sat beside him, taking his hand. It was the same hand that had taught her how to plant roses, that had held hers at her mother's funeral. Now it felt frail. He's not the boy you remember, Papa. He's hard and powerful, and he believes we belong to him. David looked at her, a dawning horror in his eyes. Lena, look at me. What is he to you? She looked away, her cheeks flushing. She couldn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Oh, my dear girl, David whispered, his voice thick with grief. He's drawn you in, hasn't he? The danger, the intensity. It's a trap. It's the same trap that ensnared our mother. She fell in love with the king and it killed her from the inside out. Donato is our father made flesh, Lena. Cold, ruthless and possessive. He doesn't know how to love. He only knows how to own. His words were a splash of ice water. Was that all it was? The thrill of the forbidden? The magnetic pull of a dangerous man? Before she could form a response, the door opened again. Donato stood there, changed into a black turtleneck and trousers, the casual clothes doing nothing to soften his imposing presence. His eyes took in the scene, father and daughter, hands clasped, a portrait of shared despair. The family reunion is touching, he said, his tone dry as dust. But we have business to discuss. He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. He looked at David. You will stand with me tomorrow, brother. You will affirm your identity and your loyalty to the Rossi family. Or what? David said, a spark of his old fire returning. You'll kill me? That would make you no better than the monsters our father employed. A slow, dangerous smile touched Donato's lips. Kill you? No. That would be a mercy, and you do not deserve mercy. You deserve to live with the consequences of your choices. His gaze shifted to Lena, and the intensity there made her breath catch. But if you defy me, if you try to take her from me, then I will show you the monster our father truly was. I will burn your peaceful little life to the ground, and you will watch from a cage as I mold your daughter into the heir you never had the spine to be. The threat hung in the air, naked and brutal. David paled, his defiance crumbling in the face of Donato's absolute terrifying conviction. You see, Antonio, Donato continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more frightening than his shout. You think I am our father. You are wrong. I am what he needed to be. I am what this family required to survive after you abandoned it. And I will not let your sentimentality destroy it a second time. He walked to the window, looking out at the storm-lashed night. Tomorrow you will stand beside me. You will be the prodigal son returned. And Lena. He turned back, his eyes locking with hers, and in their depths she saw not just the boss, but the man who had kissed her with a desperate hunger. You will stand on my other side. You are the future. My future. And we will face the wolves together. He left them then, the door clicking shut, leaving them in a silence broken only by the sound of the rain and the frantic beating of their own hearts. David looked at Lena, his expression one of utter defeat. He will never let us go, he whispered. We are ghosts he has dragged back from the grave, and he will never release his grip. Lena said nothing. She walked to the window where Donato had stood, placing her hand on the cold glass. The storm was beginning to subside, the rain softening to a gentle patter. She saw her reflection superimposed over the dark, turbulent sea. She was no longer just Lena, the waitress. She was no longer just David's daughter. She was a Rossi, a pawn, a prize, a heir. And she was, somehow, inextricably, Donato's. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it a strange, defiant calm was settling in. David saw a cage. Donato saw a crown. As she stared into the night, Lena began to wonder if she was looking at her prison, or her kingdom. The morning of the meeting dawned cold and clear, the storm having scrubbed the sky to a brittle, heartless blue. The safe house was a hive of silent, grim activity. Men in dark suits checked weapons with a chilling, ritualistic precision. The air was thick with the scent of coffee, gun oil, and fear. Donato summoned them to his study. He stood before a massive oak desk, looking every inch the king in his domain. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal grey suit, a symbol of his power, but his eyes held the weariness of a man who had carried a crown for too long. He looked from David to Lena, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer, a silent question and a command in one. "Marco has gathered the capos at the old winery," Donato began, his voice low and steady. "He will present his case, that my leadership has grown weak, that my obsession with finding a ghost has blinded me to the needs of the family. And then, he will reveal that Antonio Rossi is not only alive, but that I have been holding him captive, too sentimental to do what is necessary." David flinched. "And what is necessary?" "To kill you," Donato said bluntly, his eyes cold. "To erase the challenge to my rule. To show strength," he turned to Lena. "And you. You are the wild card, the daughter. A potential new heir he can either eliminate or control. He does not know where your loyalty lies. That is our only advantage." He stepped closer to them, his presence filling the room. "You will not speak unless I give you leave. You will stand. You will look them in the eye. Antonio, you are not the frightened boy who ran away. You are a Rossi. Remember that. Lena," his voice softened almost imperceptibly, "you are not a waitress. You are my blood. Remember that." The drive to the winery was a silent, somber procession. Lena sat in the back of the armoured car between Donato and her father. David stared out the window, his face a mask of resignation. Donato's hand rested on his knee, his fingers drumming a slow, tense rhythm. Once, as the car took a sharp curve, his hand brushed against Lena's. A jolt, electric and undeniable, passed between them. He didn't look at her, but his fingers stilled, and for a fleeting second his pinky finger hooked around hers, a secret, desperate connection in the heart of the looming battle. The winery was a deceptively peaceful place, nestled in a valley of rolling vines. But inside the vast, cavernous barrel room, the air was thick with tension and the smell of old wood and malice. The heads of the 5 major families, the capos, sat at a long, heavy table, their bodyguards lining the walls like statues. And at the head of the table, in Donato's chair, sat Marco. He was a handsome man with silver-streaked hair and a politician's smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Donato," Marco said, spreading his hands in a false gesture of welcome, "we were beginning to worry, and you've brought guests." All eyes turned to them. Lena felt the weight of their gazes, hostile, curious, predatory. She kept her chin high, her back straight, just as Donato had commanded. "I've brought my family, Marco," Donato said, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Something you would not understand." Marco's smile tightened. "Family? Is that what we're calling them? The brother who abandoned us? The girl who appeared from nowhere? This is the weakness I speak of, my friends. Sentiment. It will be the death of us all." He stood, pacing slowly. For 20 years, Donato has poured our resources, our blood, into a fruitless search while our territories shrink and our enemies grow bold. And now he finds his brother, not to deliver justice for his desertion, but to welcome him back with open arms, with a new, untested heir. He stopped, pointing a dramatic finger at David. That man forfeited his name, his rights, his life. His existence is an insult to our father's memory, the room murmured in agreement. Lena felt a cold sweat trickle down her spine. Donato stood perfectly still, a rock against the tide. And you, Marco's gaze landed on Lena, a waitress, raised in weakness. What could you possibly know of our ways, of the blood that must be spilled to keep this empire standing? You are a liability, a point of failure. It was then that David spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried, filled with a pain that silenced the room. You're right, Marco. A stunned silence fell. Donato tensed beside Lena. I was a coward, David continued, his eyes fixed on Marco. I was young and scared of my father and you. You preyed on that. You offered me a way out, but it was a cage of a different kind, wasn't it? You never wanted to help me. You wanted to own me, to keep me in your pocket as a weapon to use against my own brother when the time was right. Marco's face began to redden. You lie. Do I? David took a step forward, and for the first time Lena saw a flicker of the prince he was born to be. You told me my family didn't love me, that Donato was jealous of me. You stoked the fire of my rebellion, and then you handed me a new identity, not out of kindness, but to hold over my head for the rest of my life. You are the cancer in this family, Marco. Not my brother's love for his blood, not my daughter's spirit. You. The air crackled. The capos were looking at Marco with new, suspicious eyes. You have no proof, Marco snarled, but I do. Every head turned to Donato. He pulled a small, old-fashioned voice recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table. He pressed play. The old man is too hard on him, Marco. I can't take it. A young, desperate Antonio's voice. Then leave, Antonio. I can help you disappear. You can have a new life. All I ask is for your loyalty when the time comes. Marco's voice, younger, but unmistakably his. The recording continued, detailing the plan, the betrayal. Marco's face was a mask of pure, undiluted fury. He had been outmaneuvered. The weakness, Donato said, his voice deathly quiet, was not in my heart. It was in my trust. I trusted you, and you betrayed me. You betrayed my brother. You betrayed this family. He looked around the table at the capos. The question is no longer about my leadership. The question is, will you stand with a traitor? For a moment, the room was perfectly balanced on a knife's edge. Then, one of the older capos, a man named Enzo, grunted and slowly stood, moving to stand behind Donato's chair. One by one, the others followed. The shift in power was palpable, a physical force moving across the room. Marco was isolated. His eyes darted around, wild with panic and rage. He saw his life, his power crumbling, and his gaze landed on Lena. It happened in a blur. He pulled a pistol from his jacket. If I can't have it, no one will, he screamed, and the barrel swung towards Donato. There was no time to think. There was only instinct, a lifetime of love for her father, and the confusing, terrifying, undeniable feelings for the man who had kidnapped her, accused her, and claimed her as his own. Lena moved. She shoved Donato to the side, putting herself between him and the gun. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in her shoulder. The force of it spun her around. She heard Donato's roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, and then more gunshots, a chaotic symphony of violence. Strong arms caught her as her knees buckled. Donato. He lowered her to the ground, his face a terrifying canvas of rage and a fear she had never seen in him before. Lena, look at me, he commanded. his hands pressing hard against the wound in her shoulder. His touch was frantic, desperate. "Stay with me! Look at me!" Her vision swam. The pain was immense, but the look in his eyes held her, anchored her. Behind him, she saw her father, his face ashen, holding her hand. "It's over," David whispered, his voice choked. "Marco is down. It's over." The fight had gone out of the room. Donato's men had neutralized Marco and his loyalists with brutal efficiency. Donato didn't seem to care. All his attention was on her. He ripped off his suit jacket, balling it up to staunch the flow of blood. "You foolish, brave girl," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Why did you do that?" Lena looked up at him, into the dark, stormy eyes of the Mafia boss, and saw only the man who had lost his brother and found him again. The man who carried an empire on his shoulders, the man who had kissed her as if she were his only salvation. "You said I was yours," she managed, each word an effort. "You don't let anyone take what's yours." A sound, something between a sob and a laugh, escaped him. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face, his hands still pressed firmly against her wound. It was a gesture of possession, of gratitude, of a love that could only be born in the crucible of violence and loyalty. Around them, the empire was secure. The traitor was dead. The prodigal son had returned. But in that moment, as he held her, none of it mattered to Donato Rossi. The only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms, the waitress who had dropped a locket, and in doing so, had picked up the shattered pieces of his heart and put them back together. He lifted his head, his voice raw with a command that was also a plea. "Somebody get a doctor, now." He looked down at her, his gaze softening, the boss completely gone, leaving only the man. "You are going to be fine," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheek. "You are going to be fine, and you are never leaving my side again." As the darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Lena knew it was true. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a pawn. She was his. And as she slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing she felt was not fear, but a strange, hard-won peace. She had found her father, and in the heart of the beast, she had found a love as fierce and unyielding as the man himself. The game was over. Their life was just beginning. Did this Mafia romance have you on the edge of your seat? Let us know where in the world you're watching from and comment "loyal" if you'd have taken a bullet for the boss too. Subscribe for more stories where love is a dangerous game.